Coach Ayla here with Coach Weiss, continuing our address of the gluten intolerance issue as a reflection of what I call the diet mentality that I've written about in several books and blogs. And so we're continuing on with the gluten intolerance as an example of the diet mentality, which tells people to be afraid of certain foods and creates a perceptual bias around that. But here's the interesting one, Coach. You know me as a sociologist, I love looking at the big picture rather than the little tiny picture. So this researcher in particular asked, is it a coincidence that the specter of gluten intolerance only emerged in the midst of the low-carb bonanza? Interesting. All right. He does a chart where he shows the major newspapers that mention gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity over the past 2 decades, that's 20 years, and compared it with the rate at which they mentioned the Atkins diet. Quote, both popular cultural trends began to surface about 10 years ago. The Atkins diet peaked in 2004, and gluten intolerance followed a year or two later. This is classic voguing, cultural voguing. That's my term, not the researchers. We call this an elective affinity. In sociology, this is called an elective affinity, Coach, because it's a good way to market 2 versions of the same thing. Both Atkins diet and the gluten intolerance perception is what? Carbs are bad?
Yeah, carbs are bad, so
this is just eliminating a certain kind of carb.
Yeah.
All right? And this caters to the dieter mindset to eliminate food choices and implement self-denial and self-deprivation strategies on a similar scale that Atkins did. So what we see, and I can't show you the graph because I didn't print it out, but what we see on this chart and graph, Coach, is that as more people bought into the voguing trend of Atkins, then gluten intolerance as a voguing trend rode on those coattails in order to feed that same mentality.
Yeah.
So we call that an elective affinity, and I call it in the industry a voguing trend, Coach.
Yeah, and if they were able to track that over even a longer period of time, you'd be able to see quite clearly people get bored of one of these things and move on to something else.
That's my next point.
Like, that's not what they weren't graphing that in that particular example, but that's pretty common, or it's not common, it's the way it always happens.
You feed into my next exact point. In order to prove this as a voguing trend, you can go back, if you're old as me, you can go back to the 70s and sociologically look at the actual voguing trends of diet and what people believe to be true. And you're going to attack me for what I'm saying about gluten intolerance because you know for sure you have it. Well, I'm telling you that in the year 2020, it'll be something else that you know for sure that you have. So I'm going to go back in time now and show you what I mean by voguing trend in the next clip.